So I will start off with okay, let's create a folder for this new subject, object-oriented programming. Only OOP. Let's create index.php. Okay, just a few seconds. Please, can anyone confirm if they can hear me? Kind of moving blind here. Anyone? Hello? Hello? Okay. Well, object-oriented programming is nothing special. It's just a much more organized form of writing code, and it makes code like reusable. People can understand your code better when it's structured in an object-oriented pattern. So the first thing here is classes and objects. So let's go over what OOP is. And as you know, it stands for object-oriented programming, and it is a procedural programming that is about writing procedures or functions that perform operations on data. And okay, procedural programming and OOP are different. So procedural programming is writing procedures or functions that perform operations on data, while object-oriented programming is about creating objects that contain both data and functions. That is the easy way to put it. Now, we'll start with our first topic, classes. Classes are also known as objects. So, this is how you define a class in PHP. First, in our PHP file, we open the PHP tag right here. So we define a class by saying class. Let's take, for example, customer class. So this is how you define a class in PHP. The class annotation, or the class keyword, and then the name of the class. So basically what this is a customer. This class will hold like the instances of customers. Okay. First, let's define variables, which are called, in this case, properties of a class. And we say here, called a customer can have a customer ID. Customer can have a name. Customer can have what else can a customer have? Let's see. The balance. Say the wallet balance. And an email. customer can have an email too. Okay, so these are like the properties of a customer, things every customer must have or will have. So now we add what we call, what do we call them here? Private, public, private and public and protected. So what this does, it restricts or allows access to a particular variable or property inside a class. So when a variable is declared as public, it means anything outside this class can access these variables, can access these properties of this class. And we'll take an example here. Now let us, and you can also give a default value here. Actually, you can put a default value equals to id equals to 0 or 1. Basically things you can do. Alright, let us use this class now. So to use a class, we have to instantiate a class. How we instantiate is, we remember this is outside the class we are now. We do this, say declare a new customer variable, say this equals to new customer. This is an instantiated customer class. Let's take this out. Or we can leave that in, and let me just show you that you can actually access public variables. Say name equals to so if we come here and say echo customer ID, put a space here, echo customer name. It's here. So to check this out, we are going to go to, remember we have to start up our XAMPP control panel and enable our Apache server and MySQL. When this is running, we access this by going here, looking for localhost. If you remember, it's in the project folder, localhost/project, and we created a new folder called OOP. OOP here, and there you have it. We printed both our ID and the name. Now, if we say this ID is private, because people are not meant to have our customer's ID, people are not meant to know this. If we try to call it here, you see that we get an error. Now we refresh, and it says here, cannot access private property customer ID. See, So, and you have another one called protected. What private does is it makes sure that only this field can only be used inside this particular class. But there's also another one called protected. So what protected does is this ID will now be only used within the class and in any other class that extends it, that inherits from it. But we'll come to inheritance soon enough. So okay, and let's talk about constructors. So what constructors are? What a constructor is and we know that many programming languages actually use constructors, so they are like generic. This is like a generic knowledge you can have. A constructor is a function that is run every time a class is instantiated, meaning as soon as this is run, the constructor will run. So how you declare a constructor in PHP, you have it as public __ construct open, and this here you have your I forgot the function keyword here. So public function. Yes, this is how you declare a constructor. This is how you write a constructor function. So let us echo this is the constructor. Let us now if we run this, in fact we don't even need to call any of this. Just by running this alone, refresh, this is the constructor. See that we don't have to call anything. This function always runs when a customer class is instantiated. Now the constructor is useful in many ways. And how so? Because you can actually, instead of declaring new, putting constant variables here or values here, you can actually use the constructor to define the contents of this class and then use it in the function instead of putting it here manually. So how a constructor can help is you can say, when you put a parameter here, call it ID, name, you just put all the parameters, email and balance. What you do in the parameter now is saying this name or this ID means this ID in the class. This class's ID will now be equal to whatever the user passes into the constructor, into the class. And we can continue with the rest. Name, this, email, this, balance. So you can take this off now. Don't need it anymore. Save that. See, there's an error here because we have to fill in the constructors required fields. So we give an ID of 1. Let me give a number here. The name, an email, let's say I have a balance of 0. So now if we do this again, we echo the customer ID and name again. Watch what we get. And remember, we can turn this now to private since we don't need to access those values. Access proper. Okay, what went wrong here? Okay, we cannot access this, but now what we can do is we have what we call, remember these are properties. Remember here we are still trying to access these variables and it will not work because we don't have access to them because they are all private now. Now we also have something called methods. So methods you shouldn't confuse yourself because methods are just functions, but these are functions that are tied to a class. So methods are functions. They are called methods because they are tied to a class. Just a fancy name for class functions. So we can say get email here. Public. You find a function the same way. Public function. Let's say get ID and create other ones. Get name and get email. Now what we just do is return this ID, return this name, name of a function, right? Common case, and finally we return this email. Now instead of calling properties, we call the functions. Say get ID, get name. Remember their function, so we have to put our brackets here. Save and then refresh. We have the data just as we are looking for. Now that is methods, the use of methods in classes. Okay. So that is all for methods and classes. So let us go to abstract classes. Oh no, let us go to inheritance. So inheritance is basically another class Another class, when one class inherits from another class, it means they have access to everything inside that particular class they are inheriting from. Now let us see an example. Let's create a second class of subscribers instead. So every customer can be a subscriber. That is okay, subscriber then curly braces. And how we inherit from a particular class is, say this extends customer. So now we can define a subscriber's own field. We can say private plan. Subscriber can have a plan. So we run this. We write the constructor here. So public function construct. So we can do this now. Say ID, name, email, follow one here, call balance. So if we want the parent class constructor to run, it will be like parent construct, and you put in the values you want here, except plan, because plan doesn't exist. So now set this plan. Excuse me. Please, any question so far? Can anybody hear me? Is anyone here now? Any indication? Before we carry on, any indication at all? Okay. Said here, waiting for this class to start, having serious issues in my connection. We started the class with I just saw a message and please, Pascal, can you hear me? Okay, so we say here plans. So it says here undefined method constructing parent. Okay, it's not construct, it's underscore construct, underscore construct. Let's write that here, underscore. Alright, there we go. So it will work now. So let's turn this down a little bit. Now if we actually instantiate a subscriber here, if we instantiate a subscriber, let's say subscriber, give it the same values, then we have plan. Let's say our plan is basic plan. Now if we do an echo subscriber, let's create a method here, public function gets plan. So if we say get plan here, and refresh, we'll have our basic plan. Now this is where inheritance plays a huge part. You can now say this, let us get this, another line. Now we can say get name. Now know that the function get name isn't in subscriber, but because of inheritance, because of the subscriber class inherits the customer class, it will be able to use this function. Let's just call one more for the row. Get email. And if we refresh, see that it gets this. So this is how inheritance works in PHP, and it's a concept that is used a lot in object-oriented programming. So normally you have classes in different folders, and then you refer them in the file. Now we're just taking something simple. So what other important things should we cover? Static methods and static properties and abstract classes. Okay, let's go for abstract classes now. Let's see. Instead of using, you say an abstract class, what an abstract class is. Let me show you an abstract class with an example. Comment out the subscribers plots, and then try to call the functions inside customers. Now if we refresh, you see that cannot instantiate an abstract class customer. So it fails right at the instantiation, meaning an abstract class cannot be instantiated. So how do we use an abstract class? An abstract classes are only used by inheritance. You can only use an abstract class when you inherit them. For example, the subscriber. Now if we try to use the subscriber like we did before, refresh this page, you see that it still works normally because it is inherited here. Only inherited classes now can work. So we have next static methods. Okay. The static method is a method that can be called without having to instantiate a class. Now let us create a method, static method here. We call it let's do it in subscriber. Public. Now the keyword static is used for a static function. Let's call it public static function. Then what do we say? Static example. Just give a name inside our static. Let's say return name. Now how do you call a static method? So we do that by saying here, we call the class name directly and use double colon and then write the name of the method, static example. It requires a name, so we give it we run this, let us save and refresh. Now why didn't that print? Okay, we have to store it in a variable here. Let's say example now we echo out example. Now if we do this, we got static example because I don't know how to scale static example. Refresh, we have static example. So that is how you call a static method. Now, even though as method can be static, it can also have static properties. Which is basically this can be static even if it's private. Now let's make this static and see how it can be defined here. Now we say here private static how do you reference a static property inside the constructor? We don't use this now, but we use the keyword called self double colon, and we need the dollar sign here, and now it is referencing this static method, this static property, static variable. Now let us uncomment this code and this. You see that it works just the same way, so we don't need any other, I just need this. Rephrase this. Accessing static property subscriber plan, property not static. Subscriber plan non-static. Undefined subscriber plan 40. So why is this failing? I'm trying to understand it. Oh, okay. If you notice, it failed on line 40. On line 40, that is this. We are using this to call the plan. Okay. Oh, it's even great this failure happened. So we cannot reference a static variable with this anymore. We have to use that keyword called self underscore this. Now, if we run get plan again, definitely work this time. There we go. So that's, my friends, are just the simple basic things you need to know in OOP, object oriented programming.